Welcome everybody to the Parenting and Bonding with Children's Books show, where we believe that books are magic and have the power to transform homes. On this show, we talk to the authors behind the magic to find out their true intentions behind the books. And tonight we are here with Timothy Stuetz. Hi, Timothy.
Hello, Quinn. Lovely to be with you.
Lovely to be with you. I love your background and your smile. I'm just so excited to be looking at you and
Uh,
chatting with you today.
Thank you. I love your smile and all the light that's shining on your face.
Oh, yes, it's a lot of light. It was funny. So, Timothy, I don't even know where to start, but I guess I'll start and I'll give you guys a brief background on Timothy, and I have some notes over here. So, Timothy, the Magical Kids book creator, has written more children's stories than anyone alive. And that's saying a bit. And when I give you guys the number, you will hear why that is fitting. So he writes to inspire everyone to achieve their full potential. The inspiration and ideas for Bliss Berry Bear and Fairy Tales of the Heart have arisen from his daughter, friends, family, teachers, and other loved ones, nature, meditation, and prayer. His own experiences of the wonders and magic of life, and that inner spark that we all have. So, Timothy, how many books have you written?
86 so far, with 10 on the drawing board and ideas for a lot others.
I would love to hear. That's amazing, number one. Congratulations. There are so many people watching this in the world in general that have a story inside of them that they just not have gotten out on paper. And I'm kind of skipping around a bit. But what would you say to someone who says, I want to write a book, but I'm just not sure?
I would say pick up the pencil and paper or sit down at the computer and just start letting it flow.
Hmm. Just let it flow. What is your writing process like?
Um, like I was sharing with you before we came online here,
Mhm.
I have outlines for a lot more stories than I've already written.
Yeah.
And so whenever I get an idea, I jot it down on paper.
Okay.
And then when I feel inspired, I look at all the list of stories that I have and I pull one out and just start flowing with it. And a lot of times it changes. I really, when I sit down to write, I have an idea, but the story just seems to flow out of me, and it might change from my original idea, or it might flow with the original idea.
I love that. This actually sounds like me with my business ideas for Aiden's books.
Uh,
I have a board, a whiteboard where I write different things I'm thinking about. And then I'm like, what should I do next? And I go back to the board and I pick one and I'm like, okay, let's do it. Let's go ahead. Thanks for
yeah,
sharing
the in fact, the most recent story I wrote, it started out to be Patient the Impatient Panda.
that. Okay.
And as I sat down to start writing it, it changed and it turned into Precious Panda Pearls. So, which is a lot of pearls besides patience using P. And I never set out to incorporate Qigong exercises for children in it. And that's what happened. And I never set out to incorporate so much about nonviolent communication and parenting tips within the storyline between a mother panda and her child, but that's
Yeah.
just what came out. And it turned out to be the longest story I've ever written.
Wow. Okay. So if if I had to ask you, I mean, there's so many books. Maybe what's your favorite book that you've ever written? If you can't name one, that's okay.
uh, everyone, the last book I wrote was is my favorite one.
The last book you wrote, okay.
But the very first one I wrote, where Blissberry Bear comes to Earth because children um, see that there's not as much love on earth as they would like. So Blissberry Bear, when he hears children call, he can show up and he comes to Earth in a blue pearl starship from the Great Bear constellation and literally helps children understand the challenges of modern life and daily life from a higher perspective and a perspective of love. So that's probably still my favorite book.
Mm-hmm. So, why did you start writing? What made you say, okay, I want to write a children's book? Do you remember?
I remember very well.
Okay.
I owned a chocolate shop at the time, and I literally got a box of bears delivered to my store, which I never ordered. And being a CPA and liking a mystery, I found out who the bears belonged to. And when the people came over, they actually gifted me all of the bears, and I carried one of them on the front seat of the car with me. And one day I picked it up at a stoplight and I asked it who it was, and it told me Poet Bear. And at the time, I wrote love poetry, I wrote philosophical poetry. So I thought of taking all of my poetry, putting it in a little book, boxing it up with the little teddy bear, and selling it.
Mm-hmm.
And I got that all together, put it on the counter to sell, and my mother said, "You missed your calling. That should have been a children's book."
Hmm.
And I looked at my mother and said, "Read my poetry, Mom. It's not for children." And and literally 6 months later, the idea for Blissberry Bear, the name changed to Blissberry Bear because somebody had already been using Poet Bear for children's items. Um, so 6 months later, the idea for the story came, and I just sat down and wrote it. And then it was like magic. Story after story just started flowing out.
Mm-hmm. So, 86 books later and 10 more on the way. If I asked you, what is the reason, what drives you to continue putting stories out for children, what would you say?
It's my life. I can't turn it off even if I want to.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I look at it as God's gift. And every time I reread one of my stories, I'm actually amazed at what comes out. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's what drives me. And I wish I had more time to write. I'd like to just knock those 10 stories out that are on the drawing board. But I've also found that I'll go for years without writing anything,
Mm-hmm.
and it's almost like I have to reach a level of development within me before the next level of stories is ready to come out.
Okay. That's very interesting. And I know that you do a lot of work like meditation, different things like that. Can you give us more information because you work with adults and children in that area, correct?
I do.
Okay.
I started meditating back in 1980 and have been meditating every day since I first started.
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned energetic healing practices. The first one was Reiki.
Okay.
And then, because my body started breaking down and I got an inner message to take Tai Chi, I took a Tai Chi class.
Mm-hmm.
And I had such profound healing experiences with the Tai Chi class that I decided I wanted to teach that. And I was also doing yoga at the time and
Mm-hmm.
teaching yoga. So everything like the children's books and the meditation and the Reiki and the yoga and the Tai Chi, it all kind of coalesced as I was being um, not so gently guided to leave my life as a certified public accountant.
Yeah, because so I started in college. My goal, I saw a movie, Catch Me If You Can, with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Uh,
And I was already into, I was watching a lot of like crime shows and things like that. And I was like, oh, I want to be a forensic accountant, right?
Ah,
So I started into the program at the college I was in, and I was bored out of my mind. And so as I'm looking across the screen at this man with all this like energy, not to say that accountants aren't wonderful, but all this energy, all this color, I wouldn't even put you behind a desk with the calculator. That's so cliche, but as an accountant, it just doesn't, I don't see it.
well, I've loved reading books since I was a child.
Mhm.
I loved English and literature.
Yes.
So when I got to college, well, when I got to college, I majored in microbiology because my grandfather said he'd pay for my education if I became a doctor, dentist, or a lawyer.
That'll do
And
it.
I never enjoyed doctors. I didn't want to be a lawyer.
Mhm.
And I started out in microbiology to be a dentist and
Okay.
soon discovered that microbiology and that level of science was not suitable to me.
Okay.
So I changed majors 9 times in college and finally decided I was going to be a school teacher and major in and minor in business.
Hmm.
So I could teach English and minor in business and maybe also teach PE. And so I took an accounting class, and the professor said, "You can make a lot of money doing it." I was always good at math.
Mhm.
So that's why I went into accounting.
Now, what was that transition like into majoring in? Because I'm guessing you wanted to be a teacher. So, was it education that you were majoring in at that point?
It was when I finally, I think it was education with a minor
Yeah.
in business. And then I switched over to a major in accounting with a minor in English. I
Yeah. I
kind
mean,
of reversed things.
not a sticking point, but I wonder, did your grandfather say no because now you're doing education, or did?
Well, he never was going to pay for it anyway. He never even paid for the years that I was doing the pre-dentistry. So
Oh gosh. Oh goodness. Okay, so I know, if we can just talk about, you mentioned Ricky. Is that how you say it, right? Because I'm hearing
Reiki.
more
Uh-huh.
Ricky. I'm hearing more and more about Ricky. So what is Ricky?
Um, it's literally just opening yourself up to allow God's healing energy to flow through you into another person.
Okay.
And that
And
and that's really all it is. There are a series of initiations that open up the energy channels in somebody's body,
mhm,
so that process can be much easier. And
okay.
then anytime you lay your hands, if you're doing hands-on treatment, anytime you lay your hands on somebody, the energy flows. And God's energy is intelligent. So it literally does what it needs to do for the person that's receiving the treatment.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. You had mentioned that term, and I know if if I'm just now hearing about it, there are other people who may not know what it is either. So thought I would just put that out there. So when I first encountered you to be a guest on the podcast, I came across um, all of your information, and I can see that. I mean, you're writing books because you deeply care about children just reading, um, and so I want to know, where do I even start? So I've talked to parents all the time in my community about the importance of reading to your children. What do you see that reading does for kids or for families?
I think Albert Einstein summed it up best when he was asked by a mother of a 12-year-old who wanted to be a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
So she asked Albert, what advice he had. And he said, read them fairy tales. If you want your children to be brilliant, read them fairy tales. If
Mm-hmm.
you want them to be more brilliant, read them more fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually happened to take a class with Jean Houston, who knew Albert Einstein as a child and was actually in that room where the parent asked that question.
Wow. It's pretty profound. I'm wondering, I know, so there's a Jim Trelease. He has the book, a very popular book, the Read Aloud Handbook, which I've read a couple of times. And he talks about, he gives this story about the two students who went on to college. One was a reader, their parent had been reading to them, since they were a very young child. And another, I think it was either they went to Princeton or Harvard, one of those Ivy League schools. And she was not the most, I would say, like, dedicated student. She felt like she was falling behind at first in class. And he compared it to another student who hadn't been read aloud to, and wasn't into like reading for fun, reading fairy tales. And he just talked about how that foundation of reading from early childhood eventually put her far beyond the other young adults, I would say, that were in college with her, and she ended up just doing so very well. And I kind of went around on that, but I guess the point that I'm trying to piggyback off of you is that reading is the foundation for everything. It's the foundation no matter what our children go on to do in life, or any experiences that they may have. Reading just gives them just that sprint, that leap forward. It's so powerful.
It is. And if the mother actually starts reading to her child from the 5th month in the womb, the child picks up on the vibrations and starts to develop neural networks based upon the vibrations of the word they hear.
Hmm.
And Joseph Chilton Pierce talks about creativity in children being the number one springboard to their future. And as they listen to stories, their minds are creating pictures inside.
Yeah.
And that's their entire base. It's like you said, that's the foundation of life at that
Hmm.
point in time. And it's one of the reasons why the majority of the stories I've written have a beautiful cover illustration, but the inside of the pages literally just have a watermark with blank spaces for children to draw their own pictures,
Hmm.
because I want them to create their own pictures in their own mind versus looking at a picture an adult created, and stimulate their own internal processes. And
Hmm.
the parent can, it's also a great interaction between parents, because parents can stop at each page and say, what do you see? What do you feel when you're hearing those words? What pictures do you get in your mind? So
Hmm.
that will even help the children's creativity and imaginations even more than just reading a story to them.
It's so well. I love that you brought that up because we're parents and the teachers and the like are always talking about reading comprehension, right? And it's so important. But that visual comprehension, that visual literacy is also important. And we might look at people who like study art and things like that and talk about how well they can break down like a wonderful piece of art. And that can start with children's books. Like it can start from a very young age, just digging into the exercise that you just said. I love that. Reading the book, even if you have Timothy's books and you have the space on the page, or if you have a book from the library and you just hold the book and just tell your kid, just draw what I'm saying. I think that's a beautiful practice.
Yes, it's a,
Yeah.
it's actually, I'm starting a book club for children, and one of the exercises is going to be a monthly live story time. And then after the children listen to the story, I'm going to ask them to submit their own illustrations for the pages,
Mhm.
and then compile those illustrations into an illustrated book by the children. So they'll get to build their own book.
Oh, that is awesome. And they can find out more about this upcoming book club on your website, correct?
They can. It's at timothystutz.com/book club.
Okay, so it's slash book club, but up here on the screen I have the slash freebies. That's the one I directed you
Well,
guys to. Mhm.
the freebies have a couple of free fairy tales on them,
Okay,
but if they get to the website, they'll see a menu item called Book Club 2.
awesome. Thank you for that. And so I want to ask you, I'm so interested in your answer to this because I came across some information on your site. So if a parent says to you, I have a child that likes to hear or read the same story over and over again. And I hear this so often, and I'll admit that when I started reading from Aidyn to Aidyn in the womb as well, because I deeply believe in the power of that. But when he was, I would rotate like the same 5 books. Like we would read the same books over and over again. So let me just make that clear. So if I have a child that likes to hear the same story over and over again, why is that? Like why can't we just start a new story?
Because each time the story is reread to them, and they're developing neural networks and in training things within their own system.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like you. There are some stories that my daughter wanted read over and over, and it's like, oh please. But somehow I had the inner knowing at that point in time that she wanted that, so I was going to read it. I was going to be happy reading it, and it made her happy. So I had no idea what it was doing or why.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I was studying human development with Joseph Chilton Pierce, he explained the synapses and the neural networks and everything that's being formed by them hearing the story again and again.
Thank you. That was a much deeper explanation than I have given in the past. Whenever a parent asks me, I just say, they love it. Just read it. Just keep reading it. They love it. Let the child read what it is that they love. Oftentimes, when Aidyn wants to read the same book, my son Aidyn, he's 8. If he wants to read the same book again, I'm like, okay, but we're going to read another one first or another one after. So I would love to know your illustrations, like the cover. Do you work with an illustrator? Do you illustrate yourself?
Straight myself. That's not my that's
That's not your
that's
thing?
not my
Okay.
forte. No, I've worked. I started with one illustrator, and
Mhm,
then she wasn't that interested in continuing. She just got me started with the initial drawings of Blissberry Bear,
mhm,
and then literally through my healing work
mhm.
and connections that way, a lady called me up one day to talk about certain things, and she said she was an illustrator, and
Okay.
we really hit it off. And she had worked with children and taught children's art and did children's theater with puppets and songs and dance. And she really comes from her inner child is very alive. So
Gotcha.
she creates some of the most beautiful, childlike, loving illustrations ever.
So thank you for sharing that. If I asked you, I keep starting questions that way, and I'm not really sure why, Timothy. How can reading to our kids support parenting?
It's a time for bonding that just doesn't happen any other way.
Mm,
It's just that closeness that
mhm,
we develop with our children,
mhm.
and it allows children to feel safe. So in that space, they might share things with us that they wouldn't share otherwise. And at the end of each story, I actually have some very easy questions. They're not so much for the children to remember what they read in the story, but again, it's to stimulate that interaction between the parent and the child.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, I love to hear you speak about the power of reading because
Uh,
just want parents to hear it, from someone else another way, because we have a lot of the same thoughts and about reading. So this is wonderful. I know you work with children and parents quite a bit. Can you tell us what else would you like us to know about your journey or your work?
Oh, wow.
I know it's quite a bit. So, guys, I feel like Timothy has such a dynamic and just lovely background, and I don't think that we can encapsulate that into 30 minutes. Like we just can't. So, I
I mean,
would love you to.
I've been blessed to work with children and families in probably some of the toughest situations children and families go through,
Yeah,
including my own daughter being hit by a car on a bicycle and barely surviving. So
yeah,
it's been a lot of it's been in the interactions with children and families in, you know, severe physical challenges
yeah,
that have been a stimulation for my growth and me opening up to more and more love and understanding the relationships between parents and children, and it really is important. I mean, one mother called me up because her son had asthma, and he actually had a, it was almost like somebody had taken a fist and punched him in the center of his chest, and then when they removed the fist, the impression was still there.
mm,
So he actually had a dent in his chest.
yeah,
And his mom called me up and wanted before the surgery was scheduled. And I went over, and just talking to him, he shared that dent in his chest appeared after his father had said something to him. So what his father had said to him was so powerful. It was literally like taking a fist, punching him in the chest, and it just dented his heart. It caved it in. And once he went back and remembered that, and we did one energetic treatment, not only did he not need the surgery, but the chest started to heal and come back into normal. So I literally learned from that the power of words, and just, to any other child that those words might have been said to, another child, it might have just, washed off,
mm,
wouldn't have done a thing. But to that child, it was literally devastating. So I learned how important it is to watch everything we say to our children, the tone of our voice.
mm-hmm.
And so everything that I write, every word I construct, every sentence, every paragraph, I remember that. So there's a tone, there's an energetic vibration that supports children and parents in being loving towards one another and being inspiring for each other.
Thank you for sharing that, Timothy. I know that in reading some of your story, you talk about how you have been with children and families in times of birth and in times of death. And I can't imagine. Are you an empath?
I guess you might say that. Yeah,
Okay. I just can't
totally.
imagine the weight of all those different dynamics. So that's why I that's why I asked you that. Okay. So we can find all of your books on your website, timothystuetz.com.
They're all there under fairy tales up in the menu.
Yes, under fairy tales. 86 books and 10 on the way. I just wanted to congratulate you once again.
Oh,
And
thank you.
there's so much more to your story that I know that we would want to hear. Just it's such a colorful background. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we go?
Ah, yeah, just read to your children.
Yeah, that's it. Read
find
to your
find
children.
find find books that are inspiring, find books that stimulate their creativity. And one of the freebies I'll have available very soon, I'm just putting the final touches on a webinar, and it's 3 magic wands for increasing your young children's creativity, happiness, and spiritual connection. So
Mhm.
that webinar will be available real soon for people too.
Okay. Thank you, Timothy. You can also find Timothy on Facebook at transformations.timothy. And we were here tonight with Timothy Stuetz. Thank you so much for joining us, Timothy.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Everybody have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.
Bye.